The surprise upset victory of the Republican. But today, the idea of Donald Trump in the White House got a whole lot more real. His visit with the current occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue today was as stunning as it was symbolic. The president-elect sat with Barack Obama for a 90-minute conversation that marked the first time these two had ever met face-to-face. And it comes after President Obama, of course, said repeatedly that Trump cannot be trusted with the nation's nuclear codes. Afterwards, the two political foes sat side by side for an extraordinary Oval Office photo op. Here is that strange and historic moment.
Well, I just had the opportunity to have an excellent conversation with President-elect Trump. It was wide-ranging. We talked about some of the organizational issues in setting up a White House. We talked about foreign policy. We talked about domestic policy. I want to emphasize to you, Mr. President-elect, that we now are going to want to do everything we can to help you succeed, because if you succeed, then the country succeeds.
We had never met each other. I have great respect. The meeting lasted for almost an hour and a half, and it could have, as far as I'm concerned, it could have gone on for a lot longer. We really, we discussed a lot of different situations, some wonderful and some difficulties. I very much look forward to dealing with the president in the future, including counsel. He explained some of the difficulties, some of the high-flying assets, and some of the really great things that have been achieved. So, Mr. President, it was a great honor being with you, and I look forward to being with you many, many more times in the future. Thank you, sir.
The First Lady of the United States, Michelle Obama, also met with the future First Lady, Melania Trump, and Vice President-elect Mike Pence, sitting down with Vice President Joe Biden. Late today, Trump was heading back to New York City. So, John, extraordinary moment. I'm wondering what you think of the Obama-Trump relationship right now.
Well, the first thing I have to say is, to be a fly on the wall at that meeting.
Or to interview the fly.
Yes, or to interview the fly.
That's a good get, the fly.
Either one. I thought, that obviously was the strangest thing. We were down there in Washington today. It's just, one of many strange things that have happened and surreal to watch, knowing the history of the two of them, knowing how much all the things that President Obama has said about Donald Trump, all the things that Donald Trump has said about Barack Obama. But I'm consistently impressed over the course of 8 years with the extent to which Barack Obama is genuinely committed to preserving democratic norms in this country, and his handling of this meeting. And I know we can talk about Trump's handling of it too, but just focusing on the president for now, his handling of the meeting was just, is a real testament to how much he cares about and takes seriously the notion that the transfer of power should not just be peaceful, but should be placid and should be smooth and should be, and I think he genuinely means it. A lot of things about Donald Trump he doesn't like, but he's now the president-elect, and he feels that everybody should be rooting for Donald Trump's success.
Hats off to President Obama. His statement yesterday to today was of the same spirit, and it's a requirement to the office, but he handled it in a way that was extraordinarily dignified and unifying. Donald Trump, as candidate, said, as president, I'm not going to do all this stuff that's a little bit out there. It's a different thing. That's political combat. As president, I'm not going to tweet in a crazy way. I'm not going to, lash out. You wouldn't recognize Donald Trump if you covered the campaign, the way he behaved today.
Yep. And
for those who are hoping that he's a different guy in the office, it's one data point, but he was low-key, dignified. He praised the president's record, said he was going to ask the president for advice.
Yeah.
And in a campaign that has been extraordinarily abnormal throughout, what they said, how they acted, was like every other meeting like this we've seen in our careers over the television era as a transition begins.
Yeah. And look, it's the case that I think that one of the things that happens when you become president, and we hear about this in a particular context usually, which is the context of when you first start getting the real security briefing and how that changes you.
Like that, different. You're a different person.
You suddenly are like,
you're in the club,
right? You're like, okay, I said a lot of stuff on the campaign trail, but now I know what's actually going on, what the real threats are, what our agents in the field are confronting, and that changes you. I think going and sitting in that chair is another thing that changes you, not to the core of who you are, because Donald Trump is still Donald Trump, just as Barack Obama is still Barack Obama. But that is a moment where suddenly it's like, okay, the weight and gravity of what's happened comes and hits you full force.
Yeah. Again, if you just saw that photo up and you hadn't covered the campaign and you just said this is the Republican president-elect, this is a Democratic president, you'd say, oh, looks good.
Well, and it wouldn't have been that different from if Jeb Bush had been. If Jeb Bush was now the president-elect, the very similar kind of meeting would have taken place, similar tone, temper, everything else. All right. So after Trump left the White House today, he spent some time with two Republicans who, despite their complicated relationships with Trump over the past months, will be vitally important to setting and executing a legislative agenda next year. First on Trump's schedule was House Speaker Paul Ryan.
I think we're going to do some absolutely spectacular things for the American people. We look forward to starting. In fact, truthfully, we can't get started fast enough.
After that meeting, Ryan gave his visitors a tour of the Capitol, including the balcony on which Donald Trump will be sworn in January. And after a meeting later with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, Trump briefly told reporters, quote, "We're going to work very strongly on immigration, health care, and we're looking at jobs, big league jobs." Mark, apart from the fact that he obviously did not say big league and said big league, apart from that, what do you make of what you saw in terms of the optics and otherwise of the meetings up on Capitol Hill?
Well, the optics, I think, and the way the Hill leaders are bending to the reality of the president is a first among equals, co-equal branch, I think bodes well for breaking gridlock. It bodes well for preparing some of the relationships between particularly Ryan and Donald Trump. Big question for me is, they talk about tax reform, infrastructure, and immigration. Will this be a populist party or an establishment party? Because the agendas of the populist president-elect and the establishmentarian congressional leaders and the donor class of the Republican Party, it'll be fascinating to see. Wildly different. Fascinating to see. So I hate to use the phrase "when the rubber meets the road."
Yeah,
but when they actually have to start writing legislation, it's going to be fascinating to see. But so far, just as a relationship with the president, the relationship with the Hill stuff seems good.
Just think about these two agenda items. You think about health care. On the basis of what we know about Donald Trump, he's a lot more liberal on health care than Paul Ryan or Mitch McConnell. And so they agree about repealing the Affordable Care Act, but there's got to be a replacement for it because they're not just going to strip health care insurance from millions of people. So what's the replacement? Paul Ryan's vision is very, very market-centric. And as you know, Donald Trump at one point was a backer of single payer.
Yeah.
So where do they meet on that question? Immigration, another question, obviously key. Trump has one of the places where he has the most clearly enunciated set of policies, but they are not the policies that Paul Ryan would implement on if he had his own way. So where are they going to end up? Those questions all very much to play for.
Just take health care, 1/7 of the American economy.
Right.
President-elect Trump started his closing stump speech saying we're getting rid of the Affordable Care Act.
Easy.
He also, as you said, he's for universal health care.
Yep.
So the health care sector wanted Hillary Clinton to win largely, even though they don't like the Affordable Care Act, because they wanted stability.
Right.
I don't know. There's a lot to figure out.
Yes.
A lot to figure out.
Yes.
All right. Even as President Obama calls for national unity and oversees a peaceful transition of power to Donald Trump, there are thousands of dejected and outraged Americans who are now protesting out in the streets the new president. Last night, there were massive demonstrations that erupted on the streets of at least 10 American cities, including Oakland, Chicago, L.A., and Boston, as protesters shut down highways, burned the president-elect in effigy, and chanted anti-Trump slogans. Here in Gotham City, thousands marched to Trump Tower to show their discontent with the nation's decision. Those demonstrations picked up again today in San Francisco and elsewhere in the country. We sent our team out to ask the protesters here in New York what they hope to achieve.
What are you hoping to come out of this rally?
Solidarity with others. Show everyone that in a democracy, we get our opinions count too.
I'm hoping with social media and everything we have at our fingertips these days, that things like this will make the world see that we do not want this president. This is not our president.
I'm hoping for people to see this, see that people are upset about his policies, about what he wants to do to this country, and will get up and join us.
Yesterday, devastated, angry, upset. Today, we're coming together in an expression of rage.
I hope that he get impeached, to be honest.
We want people to organize, to pay attention to local elections, and to do everything they can in the next 4 years to stop the harm that's going to happen.
I don't know what else to do except for make my voice heard and get the voice out and make sure people know that this is not what we want.
Today, with the Democratic Party facing a lot of problems, Bloomberg Politics' Rick John is reporting that Howard Dean is now seriously considering a run to get back his former job as Democratic Party chairman. So, John, is this just kind of a falling action from a party that just suffered a surprising loss, or are we going to see protests continue and the DNC chair position is kind of a proxy fight, initial proxy fight for trying to find a new direction?
Well, I think that clearly that protests of this kind are not going to go on indefinitely. They will happen for a period of time, and as long as they're peaceful, no one wants to see anybody get hurt, but as long as they're peaceful, they're fine. People should be allowed to march and express their discontent with what happened. I think that in a funny way, these protests portend more for the Democratic Party than they do for the Republican Party, because there is going to be a large core of the Democratic base that is not going to want to see an accommodationist Democratic Party, not going to want to see Democrats making deals with Donald Trump. They're going to want to see Donald Trump be a party of resistance. And for people who are elected Democrats and others in the party, they're going to have to contend with this. I think not for another couple of weeks. They're going to have to contend with this for at least the first year of Donald Trump's administration.
There's this issue of what to do about how to confront Donald Trump's agenda. There's also the issue of trying to rebuild the Democratic Party, because, of course, as we've discussed, they've lost the White House, but they have been decimated in Congress and at the gubernatorial level, the state legislatures. When Howard Dean was chair, he was to the left. He called himself the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party. He's now to the right of Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. Yep. So as the Democratic Party chair, I'll just say one more thing. Arguably, if the right chair, if it's someone like a Haley Barbour or a Ron Brown, it could be the most prominent spokesperson the party has. So the fight for that job is a big deal.
It is. All right, when we come back, we will talk to White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest about Donald Trump's visit to the Oval Office right after this. Welcome back. All eyes are on Washington, D.C. today as Team Trump begins its transition to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And joining us now from the North Lawn at that very address, we have White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest. Josh, great to see you. Sorry we couldn't stop by and say hi when we were down there today.
I'm sorry I missed you.
You are actually the closest thing to a fly on the wall. Give us your readout of, I know you've done this for others, but give us your readout of the meeting.
Well, listen, the president described it as a positive, productive meeting, and the reason is that he heard from the president-elect in private what you guys all heard from the president-elect in public, which is that he struck a constructive tone and a tone that demonstrated his commitment to actually pursuing a constructive, effective, peaceful transition of power. This administration has actually been preparing for months for this transition of power. President Obama is committed to making sure that the next president can hit the ground running. I don't think he expected that he'd be working with the president-elect Trump's team, but that's who he's working with, and we're committed to making sure that that transition is effective in spite of the significant differences between the two men.
Josh, you said something today that surprised me. You were asked about President Obama's comments during the campaign about Donald Trump being unqualified, and rather than saying what I would expect you to say, the campaign's over, we're moving forward, you said, yeah, you said he still thinks that. Why
well, I don't want to leave people... Well, mostly because I don't want people to be left with the impression that somehow that was just empty rhetoric and that was a slogan and the president didn't really believe it. The president was making a forceful case based on his actual views during the campaign in support of Secretary Clinton, who is his preferred candidate. It didn't work out. And elections have consequences. You know, I know that shortly after he took office, President Obama was quoted rather derisively by a bunch of Republicans saying, I can't believe how arrogant and pompous he was to say that elections have consequences. Well, elections do have consequences, and I'm prepared to say it even when the election doesn't turn out the way that we hoped it would. Elections do have consequences, and the president's committed to ensuring a peaceful transition. That doesn't mean that he agrees with Donald Trump. It doesn't mean that all of the concerns that he raised no longer apply. Of course they do. But the time for the argument has passed. The American people have decided, and elections have consequences.
So, Josh, I'm going to ask you a question here just to kind of answer this in as best you can in a human way, the kind of that grows out of Mark's question. We've had you get a lot of criticism in presidential campaigns, but what President Obama said about Donald Trump repeatedly was that he was just unsuited to be president of the United States, unfit to be given the nuclear codes, right? And now he's sitting across from him effectively saying, I'm going to have to hand you the nuclear codes. So in his mind, how does President Obama resolve that conundrum and feel okay with it? I understand he's committed to the peaceful transition of power. I get that he respects democratic norms, but what's he thinking in that moment?
He's thinking that he has a responsibility that every president does, which is to put aside his own personal, deeply held political views and put the interests of the country and our democracy first. The good news is he's not the first president who's been in the situation who's had to do that. In fact, the last two presidents have had to do that. President Clinton, after serving for 8 years, had to hand the keys to the Oval Office to then President-elect George W. Bush, who had basically run around the country promising to restore honor and integrity to the Oval Office. Not so implicit criticism of President Clinton, but yet President Clinton tried to fulfill his constitutional responsibilities. President George W. Bush did the same thing for President-elect Obama. President-elect Obama on the campaign trail was harshly critical of the previous administration, but that President Bush did not allow his personal pique or his disagreements with then President-elect Obama to affect his ability to preside over a very effective, successful transition. President Obama is committed to doing the same thing. And yes, that does require him to set aside his own personal views, but when it comes to the functioning of our democracy, even the President of the United States has to set aside his own personal views to ensure the success of our country.
Josh, in just a few weeks, you'll be signing a giant network TV political analyst contract, I assume. So let's audition right now. Why did Hillary Clinton lose?
Well, I think it's going to take a while to figure that out precisely.
Let's take your first blush at it, because you know when you're a political analyst for a cable network, you don't have time to punt.
Yeah, this is very effective training, so I appreciate the opportunity to practice.
Josh Earnest, quickly.
There are a couple of confounding variables that I think are worthy of consideration. The first is Secretary Clinton won the popular vote, and it's important not to overlook that view, right? It's easy to say, well, she got beat really badly. She lost the electoral vote. I'm not calling into question the results of the election, but we would also be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that she got more votes than the other guy.
Sounds like you're going to be from the Lewandowski school and not the Axelrod school.
I'm not in my new job yet. I'm sticking to the old job. One job at a time, in the same way there's one president at a time. The second thing is there are millions of people all across the country who voted for Barack Obama in 2008, who voted for Barack Obama in 2012, and then voted for Donald Trump in 2016.
Why didn't those people vote for Hillary Clinton?
I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that question is, particularly when you consider how aggressively President Obama weighed in, when you consider how popular President Obama is all across the country, not just with his longtime supporters, but with Republicans and independents as well, comparatively, given the polarized nature of our country. So look, there are a lot of questions to answer. There clearly are people across the country who are fed up with dysfunction in Washington, D.C., and as much as I believe that dysfunction should be laid at the feet of Republicans in Congress who refuse to do anything with Barack Obama, even when he was trying to promote ideas that they had originated, clearly there are a lot of people across the country who laid that dysfunction at the feet of Democrats, too, including the Democratic president.
Josh, you got... Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
No, so I think that's part of the answer too. Is what do we do to more effectively communicate with those voters who I think unfairly held Democrats in Washington, including Barack Obama, responsible for some of that dysfunction. I don't think they should have, but it does raise questions about what Democrats are doing to make a persuasive argument to those people who voted for Barack Obama twice and for some reason voted for Donald Trump.
Oh, Josh, that was pretty good. And when it comes to cable analysis, you're going to need to be like...
I got some work to do.
You're going to need to be a little. You're going to need to be a little bit pithier if you're going to make it on some of these networks, because they don't give you a lot of time.
Talk to Axelrod. He's figured it out.
Josh Earnest, pleasure to see you. We'll see you down there again real soon. Thanks for coming on the show. Up next, we will take a quick editorial drive down the road to the Capitol building, where Donald Trump met with leaders on the Hill today. We'll be right back with that.
As we said earlier, Donald Trump went up to Capitol Hill after his meeting at the White House. Joining us now to talk about Trump and the Hill, NBC News' Kelly O'Donnell, who covers all of this. Kelly, just tell us about the sights and sounds of what happened and what was happening behind the scenes, as far as you know.
Well, it was really striking because I think Donald Trump has not a lot of experience with dealing with the sort of inner offices of Capitol Hill. I was here back during the campaign season when he was part of a big anti-Iran deal protest, and he got to go inside the Capitol. But today felt so different on so many levels. He carried himself in a way that seemed, by just my visual observation, a bit more restrained, a bit more sort of lower volume Trump, aware of the enormity of what he's involved in. He met off campus near the Capitol, in a place where House Republicans tend to get together, first with Speaker Ryan and with Vice President-elect Mike Pence. And that was a chance to have lunch, continue a conversation that's been happening by telephone. Then it was Paul Ryan inviting Donald Trump and Melania Trump to see the view they will have on Inauguration Day from the Speaker's balcony. That's a pretty spectacular view by any standards in Washington, and that's a rare place to go. And without Donald Trump having any political experience, a place I'm sure he had never been before. So that was a bit more of the tourism side. And then he also had a meeting with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. And as he was walking out of that, I said, Mr. Trump, are you ready to be president? And he said, we're ready. And he gave me the double thumbs up, reminiscent of the campaign trail. And then he was also asked top priorities, and he mentioned immigration and jobs. And he spoke just for a couple of minutes. It was sort of the cacophony of a media day with the shutters going off, bouncing off the marble here in the Capitol. So hard to hear. Majority Leader McConnell then escorted Trump out and then came back and spoke to us for a moment. That's a rarity, too, saying it was a first-class meeting and they are eager to get going on the transition on areas where they agree. So for a Ryan and a McConnell, it's about trying to plan with a new Republican partner, and they have a whole lot more experience than he does.
So, Kelly, was there any discordant note? Did anything happen that even reading between the lines you'd say maybe there's some trouble here?
Not today. I think today was really about trying to project confidence, trying to be gracious. But in Washington, it won't take long for any of the disagreements or the trouble spots to filter out. But today seemed really on a kind of a grand tour sort of scale.
Okay, Kelly O'Donnell, NBC News, thank you. We're going to talk to a Democratic pollster about what happened on election night. You're going to want to see this. Back in a moment.
Books.com.
There is an anti-Trump protest now underway on the streets of Philadelphia. You can see that right here on your screens. It's been less than 48 hours since Hillary Clinton's surprising electoral defeat that caused protests like this. And besides her concession speech yesterday, we have heard very, very little from the Democratic strategists involved in this race about what happened and how things went so very, very wrong. Our next guest may be able to answer some of those questions. Jeffrey, with one F, Pollock, is a Democratic pollster and founding partner and president of the firm Global Strategy Group, which worked with the pro-Clinton super PAC Priorities USA this cycle. Jeff, you agree, like, polling has missed everything in a comprehensive way, right?
Yeah, there's no question on the presidential level, at least, that we missed a lot.
Yes. So let's start unpacking that. Let's first blush, why?
Well, I'm not sure I know the answer why. And frankly, I think there's a lot of people already speculating as to why. And my suspicions is is that they are rushing to judgment. Some of the colleagues in the polling industry are already sort of almost making excuses. Well, it's all within the margin of error. Anybody who says that, I think, is fully kidding themselves. What we know is that in states, particularly where there was a high number of non-college white voters, the error in terms of predicting for Trump or Hillary was much higher. So the larger the number of non-college whites, larger error. So clearly we have missed something on the polling side in terms of looking at that kind of data, and I think we've got to figure out what it is. Why is it? Are they not talking to us? Are they not interested in doing surveys? Are they a group of voters that's so dissatisfied with the system that, in fact, even the phone call is a part of the system?
So obviously being wrong means that Hillary Clinton was shocked and disappointed more than she would have. But presumably if the data was wrong on Election Day, it was wrong a month ago, right? So we go back a month ago. If they had a better model, they'd say we're in more trouble in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan than we thought, right? That's the real implication of it being wrong, right?
It's possible, Mark. The one thing, obviously, the electorate does change over time. Who's interested and who's coming in and out of the electorate, who's going to vote. What we do know when you look at yesterday is Hillary Clinton will have gotten a couple of million votes, maybe 2.5 million votes fewer than Barack Obama. So again, we're having a lower turnout. Well, our models, all of our polling is predicated on looking at the past. And past behavior being repetitive, particularly in presidential elections, which it normally is. If it's off, we have a very hard time figuring out turnout.
Right, but so just to break down, you're saying part of the underperformance that was not picked up in the polls was with white working class voters, right? Are there other groups, as you've looked at the data, are there other groups that seem to have been where Hillary Clinton seemed to be doing better in the polling, but worse on Election Day?
The largest correlation seems to be that. Here's the truth. I'm not even sure about the exit polls right now. We're reporting on some of the exit polls as if they're religion, and yet I'm not sure, particularly the Hispanic number, for example, that many of us are already repeating. When you look at the precinct or county level data, I'm not sure that the reality is going to be that Donald Trump did better with Hispanics than Obama. I'm highly skeptical.
Than Romney.
Of that. I'm sorry, than Romney. Excuse me, than Romney.
Let me go to a particular group that's been bugging me for the last 2 days. White college-educated voters. We saw polling all year long, including some that we did here with highly reputable pollsters that said Hillary Clinton was going to be the first Democrat ever to win white college-educated voters. She was way ahead with white college-educated women and ahead with white college-educated men.
Right.
On the day, at least according to the exit polls, she won white college-educated women by a much narrower margin and lost white college-educated men. So what explains that?
There are multiple scenarios. Part of it, is it possible that there's this sort of shy Trump voter scenario that we've talked about? I think it's possible. I'm still not there yet. And again, I think we've got a lot of digging to do. The great part about data these days is take 6 months from now when the voter files are updated, we're going to be able to look back at people who said that they were going to vote for Hillary Clinton and look at those white college-educated voters and really see in these precincts what happened. The other thing is, I think we make broad assumptions. What's a white college-educated voter? Let's be clear. A white college-educated voter in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, in the suburbs of Philadelphia, isn't the same as a white college-educated voter in Des Moines. And to sort of blanket say that they are is kind of silly. And so to some extent, I think we have to look. Hillary Clinton won Orange County, California, I believe the first Democrat to do that. That's that kind of white college-educated voter in one place, as opposed to Des Moines or any of the other places in the Midwest, even Pittsburgh.
I agree with you. One of the biggest problems in American journalism, political journalism, and politics is treating the exit poll like it's a tablet. It is done on the cheap now. It's just not great. So if Hillary Clinton called you up and said, Jeff, I need to figure out what happened, what kind of autopsy could you do on their data and on the public data to figure out what happened?
I'm sure that they did the best that they could do with the data that they had. I think that what I would want to do is to say, wait, take a pause, look at this stuff in a couple of months, and let's really look deep, deep, deep. Like the modeling stuff that was done, some of it was very good in terms of looking and figuring out. We looked at early voters versus how they were modeled, and I think a lot of that stuff may have been very right. The question is predicting turnout, looking at turnout, differentials. Did we sort of miss something in that? And again, that's very hard.
Could you go back and look at their model and look at their data and say, whoa, whoa, given what we know happened, this was a mistake. This assumption was a mistake.
We all are going to be able to do that. There should be, there should be no doubt, which we couldn't used to, Mark. The exit poll was the only way we could do it. Now we actually have a tremendous amount more data to go back and make the call in a more real way. Let me give you one data point, right? The exit poll right now, and I think there's a lot of good to the exit poll. I won't go as far as you did, but the exit poll right now predicts that 52% of the electorate nationwide was female, which is the traditional number. I would not be surprised a year from now when we look back at the voter files if it's not 51, and if it's more like, if it's 51, meaning, and the smaller the number of females in the electorate, the more likely it is Mitt Romney, Donald Trump would win. So that's the kind of stuff I think we can look at.
So all these things are totally fascinating, and I'm fascinated by them. But here's another question that just is a dumb question someone would ask. In 2012, one of the most impressive things about the Obama operation was their degree to which, a few days before Election Day, they sat down privately with people and said, here's how we're going to perform in the battleground states. And in almost every state, within very, very small amounts, they were precisely correct. And data's tough, complicated then. Yes. It's tough and complicated now. How could they be so on the money and have this operation, these people in the Clinton campaign, be so far off when a lot of them are the same people?
Yeah, again, I don't know because I'm not in the campaign. They're going to talk a lot, I'm sure, about what they saw. That is a place, though, where error does make a difference, where 1 or 2% difference. There's a great article today about what a 2% difference could mean. So I do think error has something to do with it. I also think that things do break at the end of the day. We're going to find that multiple things came into play, but a shift in sort of who independents were voting for and who they were passionate about, that seems to be a very overwhelming thing in some of the numbers I've seen.
All right. Jeffrey Pollack with 1F. That was super helpful and opened the beginning of what's going to be a much longer conversation for a lot of Democrats and other people who are interested in this topic. Tavis Smiley joins us right after this quick break.
Updating from earlier, we told you about a scoop by our colleague Reed John concerning Howard Dean, who's leaning towards a bid for DNC chairman. Well, Dean just tweeted on the topic. He says, quote, "The Dems need organization and focus on the young, need a 50-state strategy, and tech rehab. I am in for chairman again." Joining us now from Los Angeles to talk more about the aftermath of Tuesday's stunning election, the host of PBS's The Tavis Smiley Show, the eponymous Tavis Smiley. Tavis, how do you think Howard Dean is DNC chair? You want to endorse him for that right here, right now?
I don't endorse people, but he can't do much worse. I like Howard Dean. He's a great guy. Democrats need help. And one thing I do respect about Howard Dean is that he has said consistently, to his credit, that Democrats need a 50-state strategy. And clearly what we're seeing this time around is that whatever strategy they thought they had for all 50 states didn't quite work. So if he advances or engages this notion of his 50-state strategy, then again, I think Democrats can do much worse than they did this time around.
So, Tavis, you're a Democrat. You're not a doctrinaire Democrat, but you're a Democrat, right?
I've never said that publicly, but I certainly did not vote for Donald Trump.
Yeah. So when you made the point that the Democratic Party did pretty poorly, what do you think Democrats have to do now in the face of a Washington that's dominated not just by Donald Trump at the White House, but by Senate majorities and the Senate majority of Republicans, House majority, full Washington controlled by Republicans right now?
Number one, Democrats need to accept the fact that Donald Trump is our president. These protests I'm heartened by because on Tuesday, racism and sexism and classism and militarism won as surely as Donald Trump did. So I'm heartened by these protests in the streets for people who don't want to accept that particular narrative for what we want this country to become, number one. Number two, Democrats need to accept the fact that they've got to stop trying to triangulate. They've got to stop being so centrist. They have to accept the fact that if they can move a little to the left, as I think was seen in this campaign, by moving a little to the left, John, they can pick up the kind of energy, the kind of enthusiasm and excitement that might have made the difference this time around. And for my white liberal friends, let me just say this. I went to a restaurant today to grab a quick salad for lunch before I came to see you all this afternoon. And I had a waitress come to me who I've seen and known for years, a white woman, just in tears. And I can't begin to tell you the number of phone calls from friends and others I've received over the last 48 hours from my white liberal friends who feel this is a catastrophe. Let me just say respectfully that black folk deal with disaster every day. We deal with catastrophe every day. And some of my white liberal elite friends are so used to winning that you lose one election and you feel like the world is closing in on you. I'm upset, too. Let me be clear about that. But misery must never have the last word, number one. And for my white liberal friends who are asking me how they explain this to their kids, that's not a real problem. A problem is explaining to your kids why there's no food in the refrigerator, why you can't pay the rent, why you're being evicted once again. That's a real problem. And so I'm upset, too, but we got to contextualize this thing, John, I think, in the right way.
Tavis, why did Hillary Clinton lose?
There are as many answers to that question as there are people in this country. I believe that the Democrats ran an elitist candidate in a populist election. I think that in part explains it, number one. Number two, you can't take voters for granted. And number three, I think that they relied on this sort of Hail Mary from Barack Obama to suggest to black people that if they didn't vote for Hillary in the waning days, that he would take that as a personal insult. Well, I was insulted by the president making that suggestion, making that remark, as if black folk don't have agency to vote the way they want to vote, even though many of us voted for Hillary Clinton. But I can't also imagine how these 53% of white women who voted for Donald Trump, never mind his misogyny, never mind his patriarchy, can you imagine, Mark or John, that white women at that level would ever even consider voting for a black man, Barack Obama or anybody else, who had talked about grabbing them down there and tonguing them down after eating some Tic Tacs? There's no way that 53% of white women would ever consider voting for a black man. Here again, racism, sexism, and elitism on display once again.
So, Tavis, you have a prescription for the Democratic Party that you just offered. You said that the other part, another important piece is to acknowledge that Donald Trump is going to be the president, right? So in terms of trying to contain what Democrats see as the potential damage from a Trump presidency, what's the strategy there? How do you go about dealing with Donald Trump in the Oval Office?
The short answer is the Democrats have to get back to representing its base. The Democratic Party, in so many ways, has abandoned its base of working class, everyday people. When you take care of those people, John, they will take care of you. The bottom line is clear, that Hillary's base in so many ways didn't show up in the way that it should have or they thought it would in certain places. And I just believe you take care of people, they will take care of you. The politics, I suspect, will take care of themselves. And I'm not in a position to offer Democrats in Congress a way to deal with this. I will say this. There are some fights that ain't worth fighting even if you win. But there are other fights you have to fight even if you lose. And so Democrats are going to have to stand on their principle. I was reminded by my friend Tom Friedman just a day or so ago that you can actually dance. I love this from Friedman. You can dance in a hurricane if you stand in the eye. What's the point? You have to stand in your truth. And even with a hurricane swirling around you, if you stand in your truth, you can make some progress.
Tavis, you said that you're glad to see the protests. Would you like to see those continue throughout the Trump administration?
I think Donald Trump's got to be held accountable. It's just fascinating for me how, again, some of my friends who didn't want me to hold Obama accountable 8 years ago are now bum rushing for me and others to hold Donald Trump accountable. Trust me, I'm going to do that, just like I did with Barack Obama, respectfully. But at the end of the day, he's got to be held accountable. You can't run a campaign with the kind of racist, sexist, classist language that Donald Trump used, and then overnight just magically say, and now we must unite. Now we must all come together. There's no apology, Mark. There's no atonement. But now we're just supposed to magically sing Kumbaya, hold hands, and all is well. I don't believe that. I accept his presidency. I look forward to him, I hope, being a better president than I'm believing that he can be, but he must be held accountable all the way through by Democrats and, for that matter, by all the rest of our fellow citizens.
Tavis Smythe, thank you very much. Appreciate you joining us. Next, two of the best explain the whole thing to us in our stirring conclusion of this episode. Dan Balls and Andrea Mitchell right after this. And if you're watching us in Washington, D.C., you can now listen to us on the radio at Bloomberg 99.1 FM. We will be right back.
We are joined now by two of the greats. Chief correspondent for the Washington Post, our friend Dan Balls, who comes to us from the Post newsroom in Washington, D.C., and NBC correspondent and MSNBC anchor, the amazing, spectacular, world historical Andrea Mitchell.
Such hype.
Yeah, so we're hyping.
Under-hype.
You guys are under-hyped. You're also wearing matching outfits today, so you guys are like a rhapsody in blue up here on the wall. Thank you for being here. Andrea, tell me what, in having covered Washington in a lot of transitions of power, and with all your wisdom, what did you see today for Mr. Trump's first day really in Washington, D.C.?
Well, I saw something that obviously encouraged the markets. It encouraged me as a citizen. The fact that President Obama was as gracious and forthcoming as he clearly was in wanting a longer meeting, a more substantive meeting, that Donald Trump responded in kind. I was anchoring live when that tape was played back from the Oval Office, and it was extraordinary. It was a lesson in democracy. It was Donald Trump saying it could have gone longer, and I hope I have your counsel, and I am honored and honored to be with you. And President Obama saying that they discussed foreign and domestic issues. I don't doubt that President Obama took the opportunity to give Donald Trump a personal presidential daily briefing, the likes of which he has not had. He had 2 intelligence briefings, but they were of the bare bones sort and not what he now gets as the president-elect. And just as I was thinking earlier, just as Harry Truman did not know until he actually was president that there was an atomic bomb, there's a lot that Donald Trump is probably learning in the last 48 hours about covert operations and other foreign engagements that we can only imagine, and other burdens that any president of the United States has every day when he receives that briefing from the intelligence communities.
Dan, there's a million stories now that all of us are trying to figure out and game at. I'm wondering not what you know, but what are you wondering about now about the next couple weeks up through January 20th?
Well, I'm wondering what I think all of you are wondering, and that is who's going to surround Donald Trump once he goes into the White House? I mean, first of all, what's that White House staff going to be like? What kind of a mix is it? Is it Republican insiders? Is it some outsiders? What kind of flavor does that give to the Trump presidency? I'm curious about the relationships that he's going to develop on Capitol Hill. I mean, what we're seeing in these days immediately after the election are some predictable and obviously encouraging to a lot of people exchanges of pleasantries and commitments to try to make this transition as smooth as possible. But we know that this is a deeply divided country. We see that from the protests in the streets, and we saw that throughout the campaign with the Trump constituency. And so there is a lot bubbling beneath the surface that these first few meetings don't even begin to get at. And I think that's the question that I'm most interested in the next few weeks, how that begins to sort itself out.
Andrea, you covered the Clinton campaign really carefully over the course of this last year and a half. Hillary Clinton gave her speech yesterday, but there has been more or less, other than that, silence from her people, from her friends. What is going on in that world right now beyond grief?
A lot of grief, a lot of tears. At that concession speech, the eyes were not only filled with tears, but they were rimmed in red. People had been weeping all night. Because they were so confident, they were absolutely sure they were going to win. And, you know, everyone got it wrong. We got it wrong. Every pollster got it wrong. The conventional wisdom, other than you guys and Mark saying on Morning Joe and on your own program that he had a path and laying it out as virtually no one else did. So kudos to you. But the headline writers, we saw how the New York Times and other newspapers had made their headlines of Madam Secretary and had not even figured out the alternative headlines that they were going to post. I think they're trying to figure out the rest of their lives. You know, the nation has taken a very different turn than what most people expected. For these people, it was personal. Many of them had been with Hillary Clinton for 30 years. Throughout all of her public policy. Huma Abedin, who was obviously involved in that firestorm at the end and earlier as well, had been a college intern when she first took her job with Hillary Clinton as First Lady. And the kids, the ones whom I really feel for, is the press wranglers and the others who flew around on the planes with us, who had such stars in their eyes and such aspirations and really were in it for reasons of idealism and hope and change, the change that they wanted. So I really feel for them. A woman posted an extraordinary picture on Facebook of walking in the woods near Chappaqua near White Plains and running into Hillary and Bill Clinton with their dogs and posing for a picture. And there was Hillary Clinton, you know, in leggings and walking shoes and no makeup with the dog, smiling broadly. She is extraordinarily strong, and I thought that concession speech was really profoundly moving.
Yeah. Okay, wish we had more time to talk to both of you, but we're out of time. So thank you both. Dan Balls at Washington Post, Andrea Mitchell of NBC, and we'll be right back. talented colleagues Josh Green and Sasha Eisenberg have another incredible Business Week story about how Trump's data team made its Election Day predictions. You can read that story right now on BloombergPolitics.com. Coming up on Bloomberg Technology, the great Disney CEO Bob Iger, my former boss, talks to David Weston, also my former boss.
You know who we should say goodbye to right now? Alexander Trowbridge.
Alexander Trowbridge, an esteemed member of our team, headed off somewhere else. He will be missed and successful. Thanks for watching. John and I will be back here tomorrow, same bad time, same bad channel. Sayonara.